My name is Jill Bamberg, and I'm the moderator of this two-person panel, and my goal is to have them do all the talking. So I will get out of the way as quickly as possible. This is a session on small-scale consumer energy business in developing countries, and we have two separate organizations represented here. And what I would like them to do is introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background, talk a little bit about their organization. We'll give each of them a chance to do that. Then I'll ask a couple of questions while you get yours ready. Then you'll ask some questions, and then we'll be done. Fair enough? Sound like a plan? Okay, so this is Craig Nakagawa, who is conveniently mic'd up. I don't know whether that means he's going first or not.
It does.
It does, okay. And then he is with VidaGas, and this is Greg Spencer, and he is with the Paradigm Project. So we'll find out what those are all about. And take it away, Craig.
Thanks, Jill. So as Jill said, my name is Craig Nakagawa, and I'm representing VidaGas, which is a propane company in northern Mozambique. The way I got from here to there is a little bit of a winding story, but I started out life in working for Lehman Brothers and then private equity and technology, and stumbled upon going from the last mile of voice, video, and data to the last mile of vaccine delivery. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and about how we approached some problems that we encountered in Mozambique. And, oh yeah, thank you. So this is Mozambique in 1999. The country had been flooded. Some of you may remember some very dramatic footage of a woman who was being rescued. She'd just given birth, and she was in a tree. And CNN was there and taking the pictures, and it was quite the shot here. But what you notice here is that if you look at the water, it's right up to the roofs of these houses. And although it's exacerbated in the situation of a flood, which by the way is exacerbated by a lot of the deforestation going on in Mozambique and other these places. And that's also figures in the story of why we introduced propane to replace biomass fuels. But once the water recedes, essentially there's nothing there anyway. There's dirt roads, no connection to the electrical grid, no communications. So I was sent there to go take a look around after this, but to look at some of the challenges of vaccine distribution and the healthcare system in northern Mozambique. So my task was to go and figure out how to invest $5 million somewhere in this country, but where we went up was Cabo Delgado, the northernmost province, and we were sent there by the Ministry of Health because it's very remote and it had the worst health statistics. So we took a look around, and by the way, these crosses are all health centers. There are 88 of them, and this is about the size of Maine, about the same population density, but there's where all the similarities end. Yep. Here's Alfredo Doral. Alfredo Doral was our guide. He was responsible for immunization services in that province, and here he is with a kerosene refrigerator trying to fix it. The fix was very, very simple. Actually, it turns out there was only a little wick missing. It's like a little candle, and it has to have a flame, and you adjust that flame to adjust the temperature. It's very unreliable, but the tragedy is that it was just missing a little spare part, a little wick, cost pennies. But because of that, this particular health center, which is SHI, which is also the Lexington Concord of Mozambique, this is where the first shots of the revolution happened in Mozambique to kick out the Portuguese by 1974. What happened here is that in this particular place, it's also the district health facility. It supplies everyone else in their district. And so vaccines were out for this health center and other places. This situation was repeated over and over again wherever we went looking at health centers throughout the province. So, and not yet. So, you do a great job. So, what I was supposed to do was go there, and I'm by background investment banking, privately looking around, assess, gather data, analyze, try to figure out what's going on, propose a solution, and propose $5 million investment plan. So when I and my colleagues were looking at this, we're going, okay, well, what's the problem here? The very obvious problem is that there's something that's not working. It's broken. And if you ask the Ministry of Health the problem is, they go, yeah, it's obvious. We have some old equipment, and it breaks down. Could you just please give us some more? And solar, please. We like solar. That's our policy. But if you can give us some new kerosene ones, we'll take that too. We saw things a little bit differently. We saw the problem is not just simply equipment. There are systemic problems here. And so that's why we wanted to approach this in a different way. And for us, actually, it wasn't different for us. It was just a standard business approach. And so being telecommunications executives, we had a different proposal for them. Okay. So this is what we said. We go, yeah, you'll get all the equipment you want and more. You're going to get refrigerators. You're going to get lamps. You're going to get cookers for sterilizing needles. You're going to get bicycles, trucks, motorcycles, and of course, satellite phones, which at that time I was working for a satellite company called Teledesic. And you're going to get all of this. It's going to be free, just like you like. But one catch, or not a catch, something what we're going to propose to you is we're going to say you have to pay for the ongoing maintenance and service. We're going to provide that through our organization in Mozambique, which was also partnered with a local organization. But we said, you guys, equipment maintenance and logistics is a critical but non-core part of what you do. What you guys need to do is provide health care. So what we're going to do is set this stuff up, give you this stuff. You're going to pay us, and we figured out the fancy word value-based pricing, basically what they could bear. And we said, you're not going to pay more than you have budgeted already. And it's going to be governed by SLAs, sales level agreements. You're going to hold us to the fire on metrics, vaccine stock out rates, wastage rates, delivery intervals, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be governed. It's going to be a business-to-business, B2B type of relationship. You can hold our feet to the fire on these services that we're going to provide to you. And and you're get all this great stuff, too. It's all propane-based. And to sweeten the deal, we said, we're going to start a company. And this is where they get the VidaGas part. Start a company that's going to distribute propane in the region and provide reliable energy services to them. Well, I mean, that's a pretty sweet deal. I mean, we're going in there with all this stuff. We're going to invest in economic development in the company. What do you think they thought? We got called all types of nasty stuff. They said, you guys are colonialists, you're thinly guys, capitalist pigs. You know, that one hurt. I mean, nobody wants to be called a capitalist pig. Certainly not us, and even though I did come from Wall Street. But I know they're proud of it. I'm not. But yeah, it was not in their paradigm. This was a completely different way of approaching. We wouldn't even call it aid. I mean, I don't like that word. I believe there's nothing wrong with being a customer. We say customer is king. We dignify the customer in here. And why do we always continually want to treat them like aid recipients? And so we wanted to turn that around and provide this business model. Well, long and short of it, they didn't like it. It took us 12 months to continually negotiate with the Ministry of Health, and they brought up a lot of different things, opposition. They go, look, donors just give stuff. We said, we're not donors. So get that out of your mind. We're not donors. We're here to improve the situation and provide you services at a cost-effective way for you. They go, what was another thing? Oh, propane. There's no propane distribution. You guys, our policy is solar, not propane. And we go, well, yeah, but everything you have today isn't solar. It's mainly kerosene. So that's just, that's a paper policy. Last thing they came up with us is, have you guys ever built a propane company, run a company in the United States or Africa? No. So they kind of had a point there. But at that time, of course, we had the level of our hubris scale was, masters of the universe type of thing. We had $5 million behind us from a prominent billionaire. So next slide. We actually, by March, we got an MOU signed. So 12 months later, that's me, a younger man, 10, 11 years ago, and that's my partner, Blaise Giugisato, who was my colleague at Teledesic. We're very happy, very happy. Well, here are the people whose jobs are on the line. You can't see it very well here, probably, because of the light. But this guy here is Martino Gege. He was the Deputy Minister of Health. This is Dr. Celso Verinde, who was in charge of health in that province. That's Blaise again. And this is the guy, this is Momad Samalji, who's in charge of all equipment issues in the country. Each one of these people thought we were going to fail spectacularly, and along with our failure, they were going to fail with us. Their jobs were on the line. So they're not too happy with that. Let's see. Hey, I forgot what the next slide is. Let's just find out what that is. But the long and short, well, there's actually another story. We didn't have $5 million. There's sometimes when you oversell a concept and you find out within the next month of returning with our MOU, it turns out It was also the market low in March 2002, and our generous billionaire wasn't so generous anymore. But that's getting. But in effect, we were able to salvage the situation, scale back. We implemented equipment in the scaled down number of clinics. In the next slide, we started our deliveries. Next slide. This was the part that was interesting. We had to take this piece of land, which was full of monkeys and pythons, and supposedly a leopard, though I never saw the leopard, and we had to turn it into the next slide. This company here, VidaGas, and we broke ground in May of 2002, and we were delivering gas by 2000 by December of that year. So, in the end of the day, we wanted to fulfill our commitments. We consider this a business relationship with the Ministry of Health, and so what was the outcome? Next slide. Obviously, I'm not in a Mozambican jail, which I may have been. Things not going well. But what we ended up doing was taking vaccine rates from 68 to 95%, the highest in the country, and higher than King County, certainly higher than Vashon Island. Health center stockouts, 80% to less than 1%. Cold chain performance, basically refrigerators, equipment, working from 40 to 96%. Cost effectiveness, $5 per child versus government of $6. And we were able to scale up our coverage from that up there, Cabo Delgado, to, well, I can't really see very well here, but to a much larger province of Nampula. And VidaGas, the company, is now the largest propane distributor in northern Mozambique, and I just completed its first equity round with the Swiss investors last year. So,
what's cold chain?
Oh, cold chain. Cold chain means that the refrigerators are up and working. It just means that they're running and the uptime. So that's the story of VidaGas and what we did, and actually the largest story of Village Reach, which is the NGO, and VidaGas, the company, is owned by Village Reach. But initially, we wanted the Ministry of Health to pay us. We failed on one part. They wouldn't pay us for the distribution services and the equipment uptime. At the end of the day, we were able to convince them, though, to pay for the gas. And so that relationship is strictly a commercial relationship between VidaGas and the Ministry of Health. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we wanted them to value these services and to be able to hold us accountable for the services because they're paying for them. And to also have the rights of a customer and not the rights of an aid recipient, which there are virtually none. And so that was our premise going in. When I started this, I didn't even know what NGO meant, frankly. I mean, I didn't know what, non-government organization, nonprofit. I had no idea about any of this. We just followed a strict business model that which was for us just this way things are done. And now it looks like things are all about social enterprise. Yeah.
So where does the gas come from?
South Africa. Yeah.
Will you supply others now that the gas and your infrastructure is there? Will you supply?
Oh yeah, yeah. Before we even when we were looking at this, doing our market assessment, first customer actually we looked at was the hotel we were staying at. We walked right into the general manager and said, "You guys need to switch out."
Will you offer them the same deal?
Nobody gets a break. It's all market cost. We don't give the Ministry of Health a break.
Right. No, but I mean, would you offer the hotels and things the same equipment, refrigerators?
No, they got to pay.
So that was okay.
Yeah, they got to pay. I don't know how you want to do this. Do you want to go into you talking, or?
Can you remember your questions and we'll hear the other presentation and then come back, or is there something you want to get at quickly? No. Okay. Hang on to the questions and let's hear Greg's presentation.
So I'm Greg Spencer from the Paradigm Project. I've been hearing a lot of people talking about paradigm shifts, and I've been thinking to myself this whole conference, like, I should really start charging people $1 every time I hear paradigm shift. But yeah, my name's Greg Spencer. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the group of guys that actually started this organization. And what I tell people is that it was 7 really smart, intelligent, experienced business guys and me. I just kind of raised my hand and said, I'll go to Africa, I'll do what we need to do, but I'm excited about this and want to do it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story and then some more about our organization. So have you guys ever been to Phoenix in the summertime? Have you ever experienced the sweltering heat of that place? Sweltering, it's great. Yeah, maybe you want to be there right now. And your mouth is just constantly dry and feels like the sweat is just evaporating off of your skin. Well, think about that in that climate and those conditions, and let's take it to northern Kenya in a place called the Chalbi Desert. You look at it and you're like, how can people live here? How do they survive? How do trees even grow out of the ground? And I was there with a friend of mine a few months ago, and his name is Austin. He's a world-renowned photographer. And I remember we were looking at a scene similar to this and just looking in awe at this vast expanse of sand and dust. But we were there for the specific purpose of going on a wood walk. And a wood walk is basically just going on a hike to collect wood for cooking. It's much more difficult than that. But we were with this group of about 6 women from a tribe in northern Kenya called the Gabra. And I was basically just there to experience what they go through on a daily basis and try to put myself in their shoes and just spend a few days with them. So next slide. This is on the wood walk, and it's incredibly intense. You're specifically on this wood walk, it took us about 8 hours. We walked about 10 miles round trip, 5 miles out to collect some wood. You put a 60, 70 pound load of wood on your back, and then you got to walk 5 miles back. And so it's an all-day event. But if you can see kind of at the bottom of the screen, these back wraps that you put on, they're just there to give you some padding and take some of the load off. Well, being kind of a tall, skinny guy, I had some issues with that because it was down around my ankles most of the time. And one of these women, her name was Kumato, and she, for whatever reason, took a pretty serious interest in us. And I don't know if it was because men just don't go on these wood walks in their culture. It's very strange. But for whatever reason, she was just coming over and talking to us and asking us questions, even though she didn't speak any English. But if you want to go to the next slide. So this is Gumato. Cute, sweet, funny. And I remember on the wood walk, I had to stop on like mile 7 because my back wrap was sliding down, and she came over. She was really concerned and motherly and like, "Are you okay?" Obviously it's through the translator because she didn't speak English. And I told her, no, I'm fine. It's just that I have no butt, and so the wrap keeps sliding down. And when I waited for the translator to tell her that, she just starts busting up laughing. She's carrying this bag of pots and pans, and she literally drops it. She slaps me on the shoulder, and she almost falls over. She's laughing so hard. And it was such a funny moment. Honestly, I forgot where I was. I forgot that I was in the middle of Africa in the desert, and I was just having this great moment with this new friend. And here's the interesting thing though is, Gumato is poor. She lives on a couple dollars a day. She has a laundry list of chores that's 20 times harder than anything we do. But is that the typical face that you see to poverty? And what do you think of when I use that label, poor, or we want to work in a poor community, or try to serve the poor? What images come to your mind? Is it a malnourished baby with flies on its face? Is it a woman in torn, tattered clothes, with an outreached arm just waiting for you to help her? Or is it this, an image similar to this? Go next slide. So I mean, that's crushing to even look at that. That's an extreme picture. This woman and her 2 children, they're starving. But that's real. But in the time that I've spent in Kenya specifically, it's been 6 or 7 months, I've had kind of a different experience with poverty, and it's been more like that experience with Gumato. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is, even though these people are poor, I see a lot of joy and I see a lot of happiness. And I think that we tend to stereotype the poor. And I'm not really sure why. It might be that last slide that we just see a landslide of images like that used to solicit donations from us, kind of out of guilt. But I think there's a lot of faces to poverty, and I think we need a more accurate depiction of that. Now, do the poor have difficult lives? Yes, absolutely. Do they need help? Yeah, but we all do, right? From time to time. The poor don't need a parental figure coming and treating them like children and, trying to solve their problems for them. What they need is opportunity and choice. So what does opportunity and choice look like? Is that business? Yeah, in some ways it is. But that woman and her 2 children who are starving, you can't solve that problem with business and by putting them to work. They need medical treatment, they need food. But outside of situations like that, I think that business really is an answer and a great way to start to bring the end to poverty. And that's why we're here, right? We're here because we believe business can end poverty. But if we believe that, does that mean that we should retire nonprofits and just kind of kick them to the curb and that they're no longer relevant? No. There will always be a need for pure philanthropy. And there's many situations that can't and shouldn't be solved by market and profit-based systems. Disaster relief, famine, in a lot of poverty situations where people are starving like that. But let me share a quote with you. It's by a man named Dan Pallotta, and he wrote a book called Uncharitable. And here's what he says. We give our most pressing global problems over to the nonprofit sectors. AIDS, hunger, famine, poverty, and then we confine it to a mode of operation that almost guarantees it to fail. So, obviously we know that there's a lot of restrictions on nonprofits and just the way that it's structured. I think we can all see that they're almost guaranteed to fail. But conversely, what do you think would happen if we put a $100 billion prize up for the cure for cancer? What do you think would happen? Private industry would be lining up to solve that problem and not just nonprofits and fundraisers to find a cure. So there really needs to be, in my opinion, a more collaborative model that brings the best of both the for and the nonprofit worlds together. Let's later some this way. So, but why? Why does that need to happen? Why do we need a more collaborative model? Well, let me give you an interesting fact. In 2009, you can go to the next slide, America gave away $270 billion. It's incredibly generous, right? A lot of impact was delivered all around the world, and people benefited from that. But America invested $2.5 trillion in private equity. Now, that's 10 times the philanthropic giving. That doesn't include stocks or mutual funds, retirement accounts, or other traditional investments. That pool's more like 70 trillion. So what do we do with this? Well, theoretically, if we could take just 10% of that private equity pool and put it into the philanthropic pool, we could double, the good creative, right? But what are the barriers to doing that? Well, first we know that the private equity pool will never, it has innumerably more resources available to it, right, than the philanthropic pool. And it will never move into that philanthropic pool because it seeks profits by nature, right? Well, so what do you do with that? Well, let me give you an example of what my company, the Paradigm Project, has done and how we structured our organization and how we designed our first project in Kenya. So we knew that if we could deliver returns to this private equity pool, then we could start to leverage those funds and hopefully start to double some of that impact, because we didn't want to be just another nonprofit, and we knew that there was huge value and a huge pool of funding available in private equity. But we also wanted to be able to attract, donor funding through a business model that would be attractive that way to more socially oriented people. So we kind of put a foot in both worlds, and we were able to build a business model that would deliver, healthy, we're modeling 20% returns to our private equity, impact investors, but also using a foundation vehicle to invest the funds from charitable donations on behalf of our nonprofit partners and the communities that they work in. So we really started to kind of blur the line, and we're not the pioneers of this, but started to blur the line between pure philanthropy and pure investment. And that's, you know, this new investment class that we see called impact investing. But so what does that look like when it's actually implemented on the ground? Well, in Kenya, let's go back to the problem that I talked about earlier about women walking, you know, extreme distances, carrying huge loads of wood on their back. And so the problem is that, you know, I think it's like 80% of the women in Kenya cook over an open fire for every meal. So their dependence on wood, you know, like Craig talked on a little bit about, you know, deforestation and needing wood to cook, it's an extreme burden, you know. So women are walking on average in Kenya, from our baseline studies, an average of 10 miles a week and spending 30 hours collecting wood. Now, that's almost a full-time job. Or they're spending up to a third of their income, if they're in a more rural area, on just purchasing that fuel to cook. And you know, it's unclear the statistic in Kenya, but globally, 1.6 million women and children are dying every year from lower respiratory disease. And that's caused from the smoky conditions in the hut during cooking. And then on top of that, you've got Kenya's national forest has been reduced to less than 2% of its natural state. 98% of it has just been deforested, it's gone. And let me, you know, kind of touch on the problem again. You can go to the next slide. So there's a picture of women up in northern Kenya, huge bundles of wood, average 10 miles a week doing that. You can go to the next one. And this is, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a 3-stone fire down at the bottom right, just an open fire, and that's me cooking, and I'm crying while I'm doing it because it's so smoky. And I only did this for a few days, but it's just like my eyes were burning, my throat was burning, my lungs. And it's just amazing to think about how these women do this on a daily basis. And so this problem is centered around inefficiency in cooking over an open fire. So the solution that we found was that we need improved cooking technology in the form of rocket stoves. So you can go to the next. So that's a traditional 3-stone fire. And you go to the next slide. That's a rocket stove. And so we needed technology that could drastically reduce women and a family's need for wood, the time that they spent collecting it, while also improving their economic stability from not having to pay as much for wood, and just creating a better, safer environment in the kitchen. So how do you actually implement that? And you know, this is the solution. It's pretty simple, right? You've got a problem of inefficient cooking, you've got a product that solves that, and then that's the solution. But how do you implement that solution in the right way? Well, there were 3 things when we were designing our project for Kenya that we knew we had to accomplish in order to be successful by our own definition. And the first one was sustainability. We knew we wanted to be operationally and financially sustainable within 5 years. Then we also wanted to deliver long-term impact. So we didn't want to just be able to help some families out now or for a couple years. We wanted to build something that could deliver impact now and 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And then lastly, we knew we wanted to be able to accomplish leverage. So taking the private equity funding and the charitable donations that we got through that foundation vehicle and getting the most out of them and leveraging the project to the benefit of our, you know, nonprofit partners in the communities that we're working with and the investors that we had. So maybe specifically what we did in order to get that project going. First, we partnered with some world-class nonprofit organizations who had the existing, you know, community relationships, knowledge, and just trust that we needed in order to gain access into those communities. And we really couldn't have done it without them. Second, we had to figure out the right products for our customers, the right rocket stoves. So we did our homework. We spent months conducting focus groups all over Kenya, and we wanted to give our customers choice. So we laid out 8 different stoves in front of them, let them test them, use them, and give us feedback on what they liked. And so it came down to 2 stoves, actually, out of the 8 to 10 that we were doing in focus groups. One was manufactured in China that we import into Kenya, and the second is this stove, which actually didn't have a manufacturer. So it's called the Jiko Poa, which in Swahili just means the cool or the right stove. And we literally had to build manufacturing from the ground up. And you know, if you're thinking about manufacturing in Africa and that it's difficult, you're absolutely right. But it's actually 10 times harder than I think you could imagine. But that being said, we really felt like it was the right thing to do in order to build long-term sustainability and impact. Because if you've got a manufacturer that's making your product, distributing your products to retailers all over the country, that has a real chance, in our opinion, to accomplish long-term sustainability and long-term impact, because it's owned by that country and those communities. So the next thing after we built the manufacturing and figured out our importing into Kenya was just creating demand for the stoves, which really wasn't too difficult because there's 30 million people in Kenya that need these stoves. But it was more that we were able to do our homework and really find the right products for our customers and for our target market, which was rural Kenyans. And yeah, like I said, it was through those focus groups. And since then, it's just been kind of replicating and trying to scale up. And also, what I forgot to touch on was the marketing and building demand. Like Colin Timms talked about last night, there's a lot of power in women's groups and cooperatives. And so we would get connected to a women's group through our nonprofit partners, and we had instant trust and credibility because of our nonprofit partners. And so we would do the same thing with these women's groups that we did in the focus groups. We'd let them test out the stoves, give them a few samples, and then we'd start getting orders from that women's group. And once we had saturated a group of about 30 women, we'd take a business opportunity to them and say, you can help market these stoves, sell them to your neighbors, to surrounding communities, and that's been really successful. And I'm not sure the exact number, but it's around, I think, 150 women's groups in Kenya that are selling these stoves right now. And as a result, jobs have been created out of that. So that's sort of a simple business model, market-based. But here's kind of the tweak on that, the twist. In these rocket stoves being 50% more efficient than an open fire and reducing toxic smoke by 60%, we're able to develop high-quality carbon offsets. And the model actually hinges on this. And we're willing to, kind of bet on this and take that risk. But we don't sell the stoves for any profit. We subsidize the cost of the stoves so it can be affordable for communities. And it really depends on our ability to develop, market, and sell these offsets that these stoves generate. And we can get more into that if you want to ask me some questions afterwards, because the carbon markets can be a little complicated at times. But it's really just a tool that we use to accomplish that sustainability, that for-profit, and we really feel like it gives us a chance to achieve that long-term sustainability and impact. But there's 3 things that I really want to leave you guys with. And the first is, let's not treat the poor as different from ourselves. Like I said, I think we tend to, and I'm included in this, but we tend to stereotype the poor. And so let's just let's try to give a more accurate depiction to who they are. And let's use us instead of us and them. The second is that nonprofits really, they have and they can create a lot of value. But what they need are, us, our for-profit expertise and resources. And to be able to mesh that with nonprofits, I think we can really, really have a winning combination. And then lastly is just, what are you going to do with your money? That's not meant to try to solicit any, investments or donations or anything like that, but in terms of either how you're going to spend your money or how you're going to structure how you use that money. Because gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he's talking about taking solar flashlights into Haiti. And there's, kind of simple ways that you can try to say, all right, how can we use these resources to benefit people? But not just in the business model, but in terms of how you use your money. We're able to model a 20% return to private equity investors, those impact investors. So I would challenge you to just really think hard about how you're going to use your money or how you're going to structure the use of that money. So that's it. Thank you.
Why don't we try a couple of follow-up questions, both for Greg and for Craig. So go ahead.
This is for Greg. Do you see the organization eventually implementing a model where you will have the BOP start paying for these services? Or do you think that you'll continue to use the carbon markets and other revenue generating opportunities to subsidize the cost of the stoves?
That's a great question. Yeah. It really depends on the stove model and just kind of the in-country operations, because the stoves that we import from China are too expensive, and I don't think they'll ever get to a point, or that the market will ever get to a point in Kenya or probably East Africa or maybe even Africa where that can just be sustainable on its own and just covering costs. But this local stove that we have, I think the more that we're able to build up scale and efficiency in our operations, we can get to a point, and that's part of why we did this, again, is to make it sustainable. We don't want to have to bank on our ability to market and sell these offsets. And so a locally built stove really has a chance at being sustainable on its own. So that's the goal, but obviously it takes time to get there, because if you're building manufacturing from the ground up, it's going to take scale, it's going to take efficiencies.
So how long have the stoves been on the ground?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're pretty young. We've only started selling the stoves since November. There's a bunch of, like I said, we really did our homework in terms of doing focus groups. There's a lot of baseline testing that you have to do for carbon purposes in order to verify that you're really delivering environmental benefit. So they've just been on the ground since November, and we've distributed, we've sold somewhere between 11 and 12,000 stoves so far.
What kind of feedbacks come back on their effectiveness in terms of tipping or durability or things like that?
It's man, those stoves. It really depends on preference. So this stove, it's actually really heavy because it's got a ceramic liner in it, and it weighs about I think it's just under 10 kilograms. So it's pretty heavy. So it's pretty durable, and that was a large part. You wouldn't imagine how complicated it was to try to manufacture those feet, working with steel fabricators in Nairobi. But that's some good feedback that we've gotten, that it is pretty sturdy. But the challenge with these rocket stoves is you're not going to have a stove that is the silver bullet. It's not going to be the best for everybody. So we've got a smaller stove that doesn't have what we call a pot skirt around the top, that gives, and it's a little bit lower to the ground. So some people, it depends. This is a more rural market type stove. And then the smaller one, it's from a manufacturer called EnviroFit. It's more in the urban areas. So.
How far reaching is the work in Kenya? Because I work with the nonprofit in Kenya, but we're in combined regions, so it's south, and South North, and the north. But we do have co-ops where we do water projects. So it sounds like a great way for the women to generate income by selling stoves. Plus, they do have their wood burning huts as well. So.
Yeah. So in Kenya, part of it depends on the nonprofit partners that we work with. So we're working with it's okay that I mentioned this, World Vision, Food for the Hungry, Compassion International, the World Food Program, and it kind of depends on the communities that they're working in. And so we're up in Marsabit, which is up in the far north. We're in Meru, which is around Mount Kenya, Nairobi, and we're starting to expand to the coast and a little bit further south. So there's the nonprofit partners where they work, and then we've been expanding a sales team, sales reps around the country that are going out and meeting with the cooperatives and women's groups, setting them up as retailers, or just finding a retailer on the corner. So.
Just for quick, how did VidaGas choose to not charge like an initial cost to consumers? Like, what did that process look like? Like, why is it just for maintenance?
Well, that's just the cell phone model. You're paying a fraction of the hardware cost, and you're on a 2-year contract. So that's what we were doing with the Ministry of Health. But the main driver for that is that they would never be able to afford the equipment. We had, that's millions of dollars, so we had to go in and give them that equipment. But we essentially owned it. Like these the vending machines, the Coke machines, that are in the cafeteria, those aren't owned by SDU. Some guy or somebody out there who comes in and checks the inventory every day and keeps it running, and if something goes wrong, you just look at the number, call him or her up, and then take care of it. That's what we were doing. That was a model for us.
Do you think that the model would have been accepted more if you had like a leader-follower thing where you said initially, because your system isn't stood up to support these things reliably, we won't take on the burden, it'll cost you this much, but we're going to transition over a 5-year or 10-year period so that you have 100% responsibility for this. But we don't want you to fail, we understand the base loss, etc. Do you think that would have helped them? Or
Well, that's actually what we went to. So our initial proposal was that they had to pay for everything. So there's actually 2 organizations. There's the NGO, which is based in Seattle, which is called Village Reach. I co-founded, and that is a joint. That organization, Village Reach, is a joint venture owner of VidaGas, and the other owner, which is the majority owner, at that time, is a local organization. It's Graça Michelle, Nelson Mandela's wife, and so there's a story there. But the reason we were finally able to sway the Ministry of Health is because we had Nelson Mandela and his wife on our side, and Graça Michelle, Samora Michelle was her first husband. He's the one who kicked the Portuguese out. So we had a lot of political clout, but on that, they would at the end they still wouldn't accept that model on the nonprofit side of delivery, maintenance, all that equipment. They accepted it on the gas side, on the propane side. So on the nonprofit side, what we had to do was basically train them, build the capacity, and hand the system over. And so we had to change the model in order to be able to get the MOU signed, frankly. And that handover happened over 5 years. Now what's happened is that the model has gone from being a project to being policy. So it's been accepted at the ministry level, saying this is the way Mozambique will do distribution of vaccines. Yes, it's actually quite a coup. You don't see that very often, and so it's certainly one of the things of a victory for vindication of what we do. From the capitalist pig moniker and to okay, maybe you did something okay.
Let me get one in the back.
Yeah, again for Greg. Greg mentioned that they rely on existing NGO partners for relationship, etc. You, on the other hand, went in with the business model first and ended up, it sounds like, developing an NGO as it became necessary to bring that in. Could you just explain a bit more about how, in your case in Mozambique, what the relationship between the NGO and the corporation has now become, and also how you see the role of nonprofits in supporting for-profits?
Yeah, no, we actually had the NGO. We had the NGO already incorporated, or nonprofit 501c incorporated, but it was just, we were still going to do things business-like. We just had this nonprofit shell. So the question, so the relationship. The relationship between the nonprofit and for-profit company is that the nonprofit is the demand creator. So when it expands to the next province, it's going in there with equipment, all those refrigerators, etc. And it just so happens there's only one company that can supply the gas, and so there's a public-private partnership model goes in. The public part, the nonprofit, works closely with the Ministry of Health, gets the program funded, make sure that the funding's there to roll out in these places, and then there's a service contract that's then that VidaGas provides to supply all of the gas. So they work quite in tandem with one another in that respect. So the role of this is, anybody here familiar with a book called Crossing the Chasm? Back in the 90s, there was a whole thing about venture capital and how technology companies have to cross the chasm, basically, from being an idea, an early stage company, to something that's return 50%, to the investors. Well, this is sort of a crossing the chasm type of thing as well. In that, on one side, you imagine you have the full-on philanthropy side, which is still required in what Greg was talking about in a lot of cases. You do need a kind of wealth transfer, donation-based, charitable-based way of dealing with the poor, and the most dire situations. And the other side of that chasm is a commercial model. And suspend disbelief or whatever, but I believe that that's the most sustainable, best model. However, you have to cross the chasm. And that chasm means that organizations such as ourselves, which are sort of hybrid, create markets or something, and demand, are the ones that then bridge that divide.
I might be able to just add to that too. You asked about the role of nonprofits and for-profits, and like I said, we couldn't have done it without them. We're coming into a new culture, a new place that we don't really know anything about, and you can come in with your business structures that work here in the States, but you really have no idea how things work in another country. You have to either have that knowledge or spend the time to understand how business works, how culture works. And so that's one part of it. The second part is in northern Kenya specifically, the government holds so much power. The district commissioner, if he says something's good, everybody's going with it. If he says it's bad, nobody will touch it. And so it's really important actually to go, we used our nonprofit partners to get in touch with the district commissioner and say, hey, look, we're doing all this other great work. We want to bring these stoves in. They're going to benefit people, benefit the environment, and that's a really important part of it too. So I just think the knowledge, the relationships, and just the experience in being there is really valuable.
Okay, do you have one?
Yeah. On the VidaGas, was it $5 million that you put in, or however that worked, and have you recouped that? And then on your operating side, what's your return?
Yeah, no, the $5 million was for everything. It was to cover both the nonprofit side and also investing in VidaGas. And so that actually, only on the VidaGas at the company side, that was about $750,000 out of actually that whole amount. And so yeah, we've been able to recoup that, and we were profitable in 2009, and that's when we did a $1.4 million equity round with return-oriented investors.
So aside from the $750,000, whatever that other amount was that amount philanthropy and a donation?
It was all philanthropic money, yeah.
All
of it, yeah. And that's where, our sell at the time was that it's philanthropic money, but it's going into what we thought was a commercial-like model. That, as I explained, somebody asked, we had to make compromises on some of that. So the gas company was purely commercial, that remained that way. And then the other side happened to be one where you handed over the system to the Ministry of Health.
So you basically got agreement that philanthropy money was going to be used this way. It wasn't sold as an investment or anything like that.
No, originally it was to the original person providing the money. Now, again, we out of $5 million, we ended up with 100,000. So we had about 450,000 from a different source, but it was originally posited as an investment. The organization was supposed to sell services to the Ministry of Health.
So you changed your model?
Well, we had to. The Ministry of Health wouldn't accept it. They would say we will only pay for the gas.
Eric?
You mentioned, I thought it was interesting that when you first got to Mozambique, they said, hey, solar's our thing, not propane here. And obviously there's a big investment into solar and other renewable energies. In the next 5 to 10 years, do you believe your customers are still going to be using propane, or I could easily say cooking stoves as their main source of energy? Is there any transition that the companies are looking into to look at like decentralized renewable energy sources?
They're going to be still using propane. Solar, I love solar. The challenge with solar is that you don't have a big commercial partner. I just did a big project in Haiti in which I was looking at working with Total of France and a couple large national propane companies. We need to have commercial partners that are the gas they're going to do all this stuff. If you're relying on trying to build, and VidaGas actually builds stoves. I know all about building stoves locally from local labor and equipment and supply. It's small scale. You want to do something big, you need Total, you need Unilever, you need Coke. Otherwise, you're always going to be small. I mean, small is beautiful. I believe that. But but if you really want to be able to scale up, you need that. You need some industrial strength behind it, and solar doesn't have that in these places. It's always relying on NGO distribution channels. Coke doesn't rely on NGOs.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, it's a technological progression, and that's the goal. And the reason why we couldn't bring women out in the middle of the desert, propane, they've been successful is they had to build a whole supply chain as well. Not just the product, but the supply chain to feed that. And, for us, this is kind of like the first step. We needed to just help them be more efficient in what they're doing right now. And taking someone from a 3-stone fire to propane is not really going to happen. It's a progress. It's a progression across the technological curve, whatever. So
that's the goal. Very different segments. They're doing actually a much more difficult segment of the population than we deal with.
Sorry, Greg. Hopefully you guys haven't run into this too much yet, but what does maintenance look like for stoves?
So with the Chinese model that we import, there's a 5-year warranty on it, and this locally made stove, we give a 1-year warranty. And it's the more you control the quality at the source, obviously the less you have to deal with that. But the value for us is making sure people are using stoves, that they've got them in their homes, and that if something breaks, that we can respond to that quickly. Both in terms of just wanting to give them great customer service, so that we'll get that return business. But we're not saving the environment or helping their health or generating offsets if a stove breaks down and people aren't using it. So we try to mitigate as much of that on the front end, and then just be really responsive on the back end and trying to encourage people. Like, this isn't typical business that you've seen come in and sell you a product and then leave. We want you to call us. We want you to get in touch with us if you're having any issues. We'll send somebody out there. We'll get in touch with you and make sure we get the problem solved. So, like I mentioned, we've only been gone since November. We've had a couple issues here and there, but we just respond as fast as we can.
Are there distribution centers in a lot of places around that region, or is it just one main?
Yeah, so it's we have different retailers and distributors all over Kenya, and part of the model when we go to those women's groups is we have trainers that train people in that group on how to use the stove, and so we have those trainers throughout Kenya and close to distributors and retailers, and we kind of use them as an intermediary between the customer and us. It's either them or it's one of our private partners. So we just try to encourage an open line of communication so that we can respond quickly.
So each of you chose a particular initial focus area. How did you wind up deciding this is what we are going to do?
Yeah, well, the challenge that we wanted to do, the initial problem statement, let's say, is the last mile of vaccine distribution. How do you solve that? And we weren't. I used to be a pharmaceuticals analyst at Lehman Brothers, but that's the closest any of us have gotten to medical. I mean, nobody can so much as dispense an aspirin. And so we had to deal with areas that we understood. And for us, we were dealing with telecommunications and the whole basically creating a pipe And what we wanted to do was create a pipe on which we could put anything through. And for us, it was starting out with vaccines. And so that pipe for us was infrastructure. Things like telecommunications, transportation, energy, the basics that any system needs. And so what we did is we started that, the very first vertical, let's say, pipe that we started, or a vertical sector we started off with was vaccines. Then we wanted to go to anything, malaria, mother and child care, from there. The same thing with telecommunications. Voice started, then video data. So that's the way we approached the problem. We just took what we did in on the telecommunications side and applied it to vaccine and healthcare.
You know, for us in our industry, I think there's kind of a misperception that's like, oh, you're delivering benefit to the environment, so yeah, you can get carbon offsets for that. We had over 10 years of carbon market experience, and that was we knew that we wanted to leverage the carbon markets. We just weren't sure exactly what vehicle we would go through. And initially we thought of doing forestry, but the financial model of forestry was so difficult to attract investors to. You just need so much donor capital to give any kind of return, that's attractive to investors. And it's hard to see the immediate social impact. And so with stoves, for us, it's kind of a no-brainer because it's like you get this immediate social impact, and they immediately start generating carbon offsets. So, I mean, obviously, it took us a long time to get there. We did a lot of homework, but that's kind of the short answer to it.
Greg, question for you about your experience with partners. And there's really kind of two categories there for. On the one hand, you've made it sound like your relationship to some NGO partners has really been terrifically important to what you've been able to accomplish. But I find myself thinking, at a minimum, 10 years ago, most NGOs would have looked with a degree of skepticism or cynicism about partnering with a for-profit enterprise. Clearly, in your case, you've seen some willingness to do that partnering, but I'd love your thoughts about how eager or not the NGO world is to partner themselves with for-profit enterprises. And then you've also just kind of barely touched on, but clearly a different partner for you are social impact investors. And in that case, you are hoping to provide to them, you mentioned a 20% return, pretty attractive return, although you're clearly asking them to bear a great deal of risk in hopes of that 20% return. I'm curious how different you think social impact investors are from conventional commercial or private equity investors. Can you kind of give us some insight into the thinking and what it's like to work with social impact investors as another set of partners to what you're doing?
Yeah, those are great questions. And so the first one, in terms of skepticism from NGO partners, we definitely had a lot of that. In our initial meetings, it was like, you guys are snakes in the grass. What are you doing here? You're gonna just try to use this big organization so that you guys can make some money. And it really came down to just building relationships and sticking around. I mean, I spent 6 months in Kenya last year meeting with these partners all the time and just showing them progress bit by bit. And it took about a year for one of the organizations to actually come around and be like, okay, we're gonna do this. So initially, yeah, it was definitely met with a lot of skepticism, and it's taken some time to overcome that. But I think, once I think you kind of get over that first hurdle, it's a lot easier, because then you've got, well, if that NGO is doing it in Kenya, I'll just call them and talk to them, or if they're doing it, then maybe it's okay for us to do it. So initially, it was very tough. There was a lot of skepticism. In terms of impact investors, I wish that we had some of the other guys here who interact with those guys on a daily basis to give you some more insight. But from my experience, it has, and I think there have been a few people that have touched on it, that it's the left pocket, right pocket. They're thinking either it's going to be an investment or it's going to be a donation. to try to figure out, that in-between space is difficult for a lot of people. And I think, again, it comes down to, at least the initial impact investors for us have been a connection through a connection, or, somebody that we knew in some circle, and a lot of it was built on trust to at least get the initial investment. Now, once if we're able to really prove that we can get those 20% returns, then I think you'll see social impact investors, lining up, because they, certain organizations will have pools of funding that they're willing to, kind of risk out there. Like, well, we're going to give away some money, or we could do it either in a PRI, in the form of a PRI, or actually invest in this. And so I think they have to kind of set aside a pool of money that they're willing to take a greater risk on, but also perhaps receive a lot on the kind of the PR front, the social co-benefit, and into a new, emerging investment space. So did that sort of answer your question, Tim?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any say on that?
Yeah, I work a lot with so-called social impact investors. I don't say that in a cynical way. It's just, what do you mean by social impact investors? There's a whole range of organizations that call themselves social impact investors. In terms of my answer, I'm gonna limit it to those who require financial return, and because the other ones are then I would just call foundations. So the ones who require financial return basically require the same analysis that a foundation would require. For example, like a theory of change, how this impacts the community, et cetera, et cetera. But they require also a financial return. So by that requirement, they can only invest in companies. And Acumen Fund is probably the best known. They're more of an evergreen fund. There's no return of investment to donors. It's a nonprofit model. Increasingly, though, there are funds that are social impact funds require the financial return, and the limited partners also require a financial return. So there's much more emphasis on exit, and it's challenging though. I mean, it's generally a lot of these places are looking for companies that actually can be acquired, because there aren't public markets in these places. And so that creates any number of problems, because is the acquiring company going to have the same social mission, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an interesting space, and there's a lot of hand wringing and innovation, creativity trying to come out and trying how to figure out how to exit these investments.
So I've got a question, and Greg, I'll ask this to you, and it's coming from a cynical space, okay? So I just want to warn you. And it's coming out in light of some of the things that have been happening in the microfinance area, as more profit-oriented investors have gotten involved in a space that was pioneered by nonprofits. So one way of looking at what you're doing seems like you were able to use the need for vaccines and a health intervention to attract nonprofit money to build a monopoly utility. And so at the end of the day, what you have is you've given everybody all the free goodies, and you've gotten them hooked on propane. And you're going to be the only people who are supplying propane for quite some time. And you now have them locked into you as customers. And you're now able to go out and sell that investment proposition to other investors who don't have particularly noble ideas, perhaps. So my question is, what are you really doing there, and how do you address my cynical response?
Well, yeah, guilty as charged. We set them up, and we're the monopoly supplier. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that we actually wanted to encourage more investment by, there were actually 2 other large propane companies in the country. They didn't want to go there. We first approached them about doing a partnership, and they didn't want to do it. Once we built the plant, though, one of them came to us and wanted to acquire us within 6 months of our operating. And we didn't want to sell it to them because we thought they just wanted to go rummage through our books. That's it. So then they said, fine, we'll bury you. We're building a big plant not far away in a better location. And we were scared, of course, you know. But our purpose was to show that there's a market. That's really what we want to do. We go, look, we think this is attractive. We're going to put our money where our mouth is, and hopefully you're going to come in too. And they did. We're still the #1 in volume in that region, but we've encouraged others, and that's really where we wanted to go. We wanted to create a sustainable infrastructure and service behind after we left. And the best way we could do that was by starting a company that's run by Mozambicans that can go raising money and have lines of credit, et cetera. Just like, well, it is a company. So that really was our aim.
Okay, great.
Is that company then owned or will be owned in the future by Mozambicans?
It's owned by Mozambicans now. VidaGas is there's 3 investors now. Originally it was us and the Mozambican organization, and now it's us and it's the Swiss investors, and maybe now another group wants to get in, which is a Mozambican company, a straight commercial partner, which sees the opportunity for in their case they want to sell equipment that's propane. Add that line to their existing. They're one of the top 10 commercial companies in the country.
How many people have been employed, and what about the maintenance issues of setting up this new infrastructure, etc.?
How many? So VidaGas has about around 20 employees, maintenance. It doesn't matter which business you're in these countries. At the heart, you're a logistics and maintenance company. It's just there are difference in details whether you're selling propane or selling anything else, and so that's always at the heart of what all these companies have the capacity to do.
Matt?
Greg, one more question. You described how early you still are in your kind of distribution curve. What are the challenges to really scaling up distribution? It's one thing to get 12,000 stoves out in half a year, but I know your aspirations are vastly larger than that, and yet as you really talk about scaling a distribution system, that ends up often being really quite challenging. So give us some thoughts about where you expect to go with your distribution system as you scale.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, our aim in Kenya is 500,000 stoves over 10 years. Being in this social business space, you're kind of, you have to make decisions. And there's the people, the women that I'm spending time with who really, really need those stoves. And then there's lower hanging fruit in more peri-urban areas. You try to find this balance between, we want to get stoves to the people that really need them, but we also need to get that low hanging fruit. And I mean, it's a challenge. I'd say it's more of a cash flow challenge than it is in terms of the distribution and supply chain. Because we can scale up in terms of trainers and people that are going to these women's groups, and sales reps that are out in the field selling to these groups. The challenge comes, I think the biggest challenge is your cash flows, because you're dealing with people who can pay, maybe 50 cents a week in some cases, and you're trying to be flexible so that people can get stoves. Again, it's a social business issue. You're trying to get it so they can afford the stove and not have to, ante up $14 on the front end. But then you've got this massive, accounts receivable that you're trying to manage with all these different distributors and sales reps who are giving, different terms to people. But in terms of the supply chain, it's going to come with time. I think we just need some more experience. But Coke is able to distribute bottles out to the middle of nowhere, and they've got one of the most robust supply chains in all the developing world. So I would hope that we would try to take some lessons from, you know, groups like that and kind of hitch, you know, to their wagon and try to get their distribution reach and supply chain. But there definitely will be challenges because you're going out on dirt roads. The cost is pretty high, so it's like he said, it's a logistics challenge. It's just, you know, you're trying to figure out the most efficient way to get your product from A to B and the most cost-effective way. So, did that answer your question, Tim? A little bit.
It did, but maybe I can ask, since you mentioned Coke, at the heart of Coke's success in that regard has been a very intentional focus on how to make a very successful model for what would typically be referred to as micro-franchisees, independent business people who represent that last mile of Coke's distribution system. Can you talk about what your intent is around that kind of focus? I mean, you've had a product focus that you've described to us, and you've had you know, how do we leverage the carbon offset markets to change the economics of our business model to make it all work? But you haven't given us too terribly much insight in how you're going to build a scalable business model for success for your distributors. And I'd love to kind of get more insight into that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I'll give you my 2 cents. Obviously, there's not a huge track record and experience, but you know, it's a push and pull demand strategy. You know, you're trying to do as much promotion and marketing as you can. But like you mentioned, this micro franchisee model, where you're setting up women's groups and cooperatives to market and sell the stoves. And I think part of that is how you structure the business relationship with them in terms of credit terms and the margins that they're going to make. So we try to make our distributors and retailers as incentivized as possible, you know, to push this product. You know, if we're trying to get an affordable product to people, rural poor people in Kenya, obviously, you know, you have to get the cost down low enough. But if you're squeezing your distributors and your retailers, then they're not going to be incentivized to push the product. So I'd say our goal is to try to make it as attractive to them and give them better margins than the other products that they're selling so that they're incentivized to do it. Because if we're constantly trying to push more and more product through them, but they don't have, yeah, like I said, the incentive to do it, then you're kind of, you're trying to push a lot into a small little hole. So, but I'm sure you guys can get inside.
Yeah, well, the first thing to remember is that it sounds like you know something about Coke's distribution system, is that almost everything is not like Coke that we're dealing with. Coke actually defines the easiest thing to put out there, and the adoption challenge of things in places like this. First of all, people have to want what you have, then they have to be able to afford it, and then it can't require too much change in their behavior. So Coke is people want it, they can afford it, and they know how to drink a Coke. A cook stove actually is on the polar opposite side of that. Nobody wants the stove. They can't afford it, so you have to do some kind of convoluted microfinancing or carbon offset, and then you have to change their behavior. And cooking is such a personal, culturally specific activity. It's a major challenge. It is the hardest thing I know of to put it in these places. Now, having said that, I've tried, and so you're familiar with Coke, and it sounds like you're familiar with the MDC model, the manual distribution center model. And actually, the thing with Coke, the other advantage of Coke is that it's a self-organizing distribution network because there's so much margin in sugar water. Everybody just goes, I mean, nobody thinks about it too much. They go, oh, I can take this and I can buy it and I can resell it. And that's all it takes, and it gets everywhere. What we've tried to do with propane, and we started out with a B2B model with hotels, restaurants, and that was very easy for us to do that. It's a straight B2B. Developing retailers was very hard. Nobody wants to take the inventory risk. You say, yeah, here's a great business. You pen out the economics for them, how much they're going to make, their margins, et cetera. And at the end of the day, okay, well, what we found is that some places will like doing that. Actually, we found no one who will take the inventory risk. We have to put secure cages and then put the gas in these secure cages, and it costs nothing for the retailer. They're just going to they're just taking a margin when they sell. But that requires us as the suppliers to always be on checking every single day to make sure that there's no gaming going on in the system. The other thing that we were trying is microfinance. No, contrary to what a lot of people think, it's hard to do microfinance at the household level because no institution wants to do these small little things like $50. Their minimum levels that they want to do is around the $500 or $1,000, which is for SMEs, and so then it starts to make sense for retailers depending on how much inventory they need to take on. But the MDC model is a good one in terms of that Coke has a good model for training its franchisees and then working with different NGO groups also to defray some of the costs.
One thing to that. We haven't been able to do it yet, but in Kenya, there have actually been banks who, they want to, as part of their MFI, they want to be able to offer products to people. And so part of that has been stoves, and we haven't successfully arranged any kind of a deal yet, but the hope would be, touching on that there are some MFIs that want to have some kind of package offering to their customers, their existing customers who are taking out small loans for seeds or for buying cattle or buying sheep, goats, and packaging that with the stove and with an axe, a shovel, all that stuff. So that I would like to see it go there in packaging that with some MFIs. So.
Any question on that?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Greg, about the stoves. And you said you have this goal for 10 years out and the number of stoves that you're going to have, and it just struck me in a way you were talking about earlier also, like a progression from where a user or a customer or just a human is willing to go in terms of steps of getting to somewhere. And I was thinking, wow, in 10 years, is that what you want for the women to be cooking with, using the 2% still of, or the 1.5% or the 1% of the fuel that they have? So I'm wondering in terms of just like forward thinking and your product innovation, or are you thinking about alternative fuels that the stove could sustain that wouldn't be taxing that natural resource anymore, or what's the next thing that you're trying to consider?
Yeah, that's that aspiration, like I was talking to Eric about earlier on, is that it is a progression, and this is kind of this isn't solving the problem, but it's starting to reduce the demand on the forests. And I mean, it's almost too late for the forest of Kenya. It's more for the the social benefit, because 98% of the forest is gone. But another thing is that you think about how fast a year goes by, a couple of years go by. There's 30 million people in Kenya that need these stoves, and I'm willing to bet that in 10 years there'll be 25 million people that are still cooking on 3-stone fires. And so I think it's it's trying to find that balance of being aspirational and idealistic, and also being realistic. And we do, it is a progression. This is just kind of a beachhead almost for us, these stoves. We're going to be bringing in other products that are based around household efficiency. Yeah. So propane's kind of the next step after a wood stove, rocket stove like this. So that's definitely the goal, but in reality, like I said, in 10 years there will probably still be a lot of people still cooking out there.
Yeah, and then in terms of sustainability, like if you're introducing a propane stove, like what happens to the wood stove? Is there like an aftermarket or like a second market where
They don't last that long.
They don't. Okay.
No, yeah. So the stove life on this is 2 or 3 years if it's doing really well and the person really takes care of it.
And the carbon offsets take into account the materials and the production and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just wondered, in your world with these consumer goods that are coming into these markets, is there any sort of conversation about any sort of debt ceilings that individuals in Africa can sustain for these? I don't know how much these cost or how much they make, but I mean, the more you commercialize this world, and it sounds like yesterday when we were talking about microfinance, there's a propensity for you to want to like push stuff on people, more debt, more this, more that. Is this part of the conversation? Like, what can they actually sustain? Because it's good for people to have these kind of things, but what if they really just can't afford it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and you know, we're not an MFI, so we're not checking people's credit history. I mean, we check a group's credit history if that's available before we're lending them credit terms, and you know, we try to set a decent, you know, limit on the, you know, the credit terms, but that's always, like I mentioned earlier, cash flows are going to be a challenge, and it's something that you're just going to have to deal with. There's going to be bad debt, but the great thing about these is, especially in a situation where someone's purchasing fuel, they can actually pay off the stove in about 2 months, if they're, depending on how much they're spending on their wood. But if it's a financial situation like that and not just a time and effort situation, the credit becomes less of an issue. But so I don't know if you want to touch on that too. Did that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, that's
okay.
I think a fellow, he lives right there on Queen Anne Hills. His name is Wood Alexander. I think that's about Doral.
Yeah, here in Canada,
about
the batteries.
Yeah, so his idea was to find a way to basically sell battery power to rural people that don't have any, that they're not on the power grid. So they sell. He's got a little system set up with some entrepreneurial guys in little villages who have a little truck, and they sell rechargeable batteries, and then they sell the service for recharging them. So they go around and pick up the ones that are dead, and they exchange them for ones that are good. And his company is called Burrow, and I think what he's trying to do is build a brand name there, and then so he's got this cool kind of bright green trucks that go around and this Burrow thing. So he wants to set up a deal where he can build a brand. So people see that Burrow truck coming, they know, oh, this guy's got something for me that's going to be valuable for me to save my basic cash flow for my $2 a day. I'm only going to spend so much of that on my need for charging my radio, running my radio, running my lights for night and thing. So I think his direction is his brand, ability to brand name.
And I'll just add to that. You know, with Jico Poa, we spent a lot of time building the brand for that, and it's really important because when you're bringing in a product and people can't pronounce the name of it, they don't want to feel stupid because they can't pronounce the name or they don't know what it is. They're like, okay, that's something foreign. I'm not going to go there. But Jico Poa, it's kind of Poa is a kind of urban, a little bit more slang language. It's just like, yeah, I'm cool, I'm good. And but it's far enough reaching in the country that it's kind of hip and aspirational, and it's it's a brand that just Kenyan and feels African. So it is. I mean, sorry.
How do you spell that?
Jico, Jiko, Poa, Poa.
Right, remember that brand.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.